Years later, why do fans still believe Kathryn and Daniel have an unfinished story? Years have passed. Their careers have evolved. Their lives have moved in different directions. So why does one question still refuse to disappear from the minds of KathNiel fans? Was the story of Kathryn Bernardo and Daniel Padilla really finished? Or did it simply stop before fans were ready to say goodbye? For longtime followers of KathNiel, the answer isn't as simple as looking at what happened on screen. Kathryn and Daniel became more than just two actors working together. Their partnership grew into one of the most recognizable love teams in Philippine entertainment, with millions of fans following their movies, television appearances, interviews, and public moments. They watched the characters fall in love. They watched the stars grow. And eventually, they watched the partnership change. Yet somehow, even after all these years, conversations about Kathryn and Daniel continue to return. Why? Perhaps it's because some stories become so important to people that they don't simply disappear when the chapter ends. They become memories, and memories have a strange way of keeping questions alive. The chemistry fans couldn't forget. One reason fans continue to talk about KathNiel is the chemistry they witnessed during their years together. For many viewers, Kathryn and Daniel didn't feel like an ordinary on-screen pairing. Their interactions created an emotional connection with audiences that went beyond individual projects. Fans laughed with them. Fans cried with them. Fans celebrated their successes. And because people invested so much emotion into their journey, it's understandable that some still wonder what another chapter might have looked like. What if they had made one more movie? What if they had taken on a completely different story? What if their characters had met again years later? Those questions can keep a fandom talking for a very long time. But maybe unfinished doesn't mean what fans think. Here's the interesting part. When fans say Kathryn and Daniel have an unfinished story, they don't necessarily mean the two should return to being a couple. Sometimes, an unfinished story simply means people still feel there is something emotionally unresolved in the story they remember. Perhaps fans never got the kind of farewell they imagined. Perhaps they simply miss seeing two familiar faces together. Or perhaps they wonder what their chemistry would look like today after both actors have matured and built individual careers. That's a completely different kind of curiosity, and it might actually be the most interesting one. Imagine them meeting again. Picture this. Years after their last major project together, Kathryn and Daniel are unexpectedly cast in the same film. The announcement drops without much warning. Immediately, social media lights up. Old KathNiel clips begin trending. Fans revisit their favorite scenes. People start asking the same question. Will the chemistry still be there? Then comes the first trailer. There they are. Older, more experienced, different, but somehow still familiar. Maybe the movie isn't even a romance. Maybe they're former friends. Maybe they're rivals. Maybe they're two people whose lives crossed years ago and unexpectedly collide again. Suddenly, the idea of an unfinished story takes on a completely different meaning. It isn't about going backward. It's about seeing what happens when two people from the past enter the same chapter again. The power of nostalgia. Nostalgia is incredibly powerful. A song can take you back to a specific year. A movie can remind you of who you were when you watched it. And for many KathNiel fans, seeing Kathryn and Daniel together can bring back an entire period of their lives. That's why the possibility of another collaboration remains so emotionally appealing. Fans aren't necessarily asking for the past to return exactly as it was. They may simply want one more memory, one more story, one more opportunity to see what happens when two stars who once meant so much to audiences share a screen again. But would they ever do it? That's the question nobody outside Kathryn and Daniel can answer. Both have their own careers, priorities, projects, and personal lives. A reunion should never be assumed simply because fans want one. There's also no guarantee that another KathNiel project is being planned. But that's what makes the conversation interesting. It's a possibility fans can imagine without knowing whether it will ever become reality. And sometimes imagination is enough to keep a story alive. Maybe the story isn't really about them anymore. Perhaps the biggest revelation is this. The unfinished story may belong to the fans. Kathryn and Daniel may have already moved into completely different chapters of their lives, but the audience that grew up watching them hasn't forgotten what that era meant. The memories remain. The favorite movies remain. The iconic moments remain. And the emotions connected to those memories remain. That's why, years later, people still ask, what if? What if they worked together again? What if the right script came along? What if one day they surprised everyone? Nobody knows. But if that day ever comes, one thing is almost certain. Millions of people would be watching. Because sometimes a story doesn't stay alive because it hasn't ended. It stays alive because it meant something. And perhaps that's why the question surrounding Kathryn and Daniel continues to fascinate fans. Maybe there is no secret reunion. Maybe there is no hidden project. Maybe their story, as they know it, has already reached its natural ending. But for the people who spent years cheering for KathNiel, the final page may always feel like it could use one more look. So tell us, do you believe Kathryn and Daniel still have an unfinished story? Or do you think their beautiful chapter has already ended? And if they ever work together again, would you want it to be romantic or something completely unexpected?